I'm Don Dickson, and I want to thank you for joining me today. I thought the best way of previewing what I have planned for this upcoming season will be to tell you a little short story. Many of you already know the story, but if you haven't heard it, I want you to know I was fortunate enough to meet the legendary Buck Perry, greatest fisherman ever lived. Met him in 1970. I was just a kid, sort of. I was 28. But at any rate, I was on a fishing vacation in Florida. Just by myself. I took some time off. I was a stockbroker at the time, and I just took a couple of weeks off, came to Florida to do some fishing. And I had fished this lake for a couple of days. I hadn't caught a fish. And it had a great reputation as a great bass lake. It's in a little town called McIntosh, Florida. The name of the lake is Orange Lake. And so I'm fishing there a couple of days. I haven't caught anything. Beautiful lake, 20,000 acres. Lily pads rimming the entire lake. I mean, it was a gorgeous place. It's like what I used to read about in the magazines, you know, with all the pictures. The only difference was I didn't have any big bass jumping out of them lily pads, jumping on my lure. So, at any rate, I was ready to give up. I was going to move to another lake, hunt up another lake somewhere. I was definitely going to leave this place because there was nothing doing. And I was eating dinner that night in a little diner, and a group of fishermen came in, and there were about 8 or 10 of them. I can't remember exactly now, but there was a bunch of guys come in. They sat down, got some tables pushed together, and started tee-heeing and laughing and carrying on about all the big bass they were catching. Well, I took it for about as long as I could take it. And being one of those guys who wasn't timid in any way, I just decided I'd get up and go over to those tables and interrupt them and just ask if they'd share some information with me. If they were catching fish in this lake out here to begin with, and secondly, what they were catching them on and all the above. And I wanted to find out if it was all true. Well, they said, oh yeah, we've been catching a lot of big fish. And yes, we're fishing Orange Lake. And they said, we owe it all to this guy here at the end of the table. And they introduced him as Mr. Buck Perry. Well, I'd never heard of him. I'd read all the fishing books and stuff, but I'd never heard of Buck Perry. Well, they went on to say that this Mr. Perry had made a bunch of discoveries concerning the habits of a freshwater game fish. And it really had revolutionized modern day fishing. He was the king. He was the guy. You know, he was a real pioneer. And I'm thinking, he doesn't look much like one. You know, he had his old overalls on, you know, just an old country boy from North Carolina. Didn't seem like anything special. But at any rate, I'm listening to them talking, and they all talking about catching all these fish, and a few of them over 10 pounds. And I'm thinking, man, are you serious? And after I explained that I had fished there for a couple of days without catching a fish, Mr. Perry, at the end of the table, in his North Carolina drawl, said, let me understand this. Are you telling me you've been fishing this lake for 2 days, you ain't caught a fish? Just kind of like that, you know. I said, I'm not too embarrassed to admit it. Yeah, I haven't caught the first fish. I said, I was getting ready to pull out right after dinner, go find a new lake or just head on home and give up altogether. I was pretty discouraged. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, son. He said, if you're willing to stay another day, he said, you show up down at that boat ramp tomorrow morning at daybreak. He said, you can ride out with me tomorrow morning. I'll show you how to catch a bass, not only in this lake, but I'll show you how to catch a bass. Well, from everything that everybody else had been saying, this is supposed to be the greatest fisherman ever. He's going to take me fishing. Why? I don't know. He just took pity on me. So I said, well, okay, I'll hang around. I'm all up for that. Let's go out. So next morning we meet at the dock. I'm going to try to shorten this up a little bit. Meet at the dock. We start cruising out over that big old water. It is a big old lake now, 20,000 acres. And he went right on through all of those lily pads, about 75 yards from the shore out. There's lily pads, as far as you can see. He just went right through them lily pads and kept right on going, heading across the lake. And I thought, oh, he's got some secret spot over there somewhere. And I couldn't wait to get fishing. Well, to my surprise, we got about in the middle of the lake. And he had this little depth meter that he was staring at. And finally, he just shut that engine off. We're out in the middle of the lake now. We're half a mile at least from any lily pads. There's no weeds. There's no stick-ups. There's no grass of any type. We are in the middle of the lake in open water. And he shut that engine off and he said, Donald, he said, I'm going to tell you something right now. And he said, I don't want you to ever forget it. It'll change your fishing life. Woo, I'm all ears. He said, most people today don't understand the very basic fishing fact that deep water is the home of the fish. It's where adult fish spend 95% of their entire life, somewhere in deep water. He said, now the way I say it is, it's the deepest water in the lake. It's the deepest water in an area of a lake. Or in some cases, like many times in Florida, it's the deepest water available to the fish. But I can promise you one thing. Deep water is the home of the fish. Nothing will make any sense to you if you first don't accept this basic fact. Deep water is where fish spend 95% of their entire life. Well, I don't mind telling you. It was all I could do to keep from snickering. But I knew that wasn't true. Every bass I ever caught, I was casting towards the bank. They had some stick up, some piece of grass, some log, some lily pad, something. Never caught one fish out in the middle of the lake, never thought about it. He said, that's a problem. He said, sure, during the spawn, during certain seasons of the year, you'll have some fish up there in the shallows. But 95% of their entire life is spent in deep water. And that was the beginning of my life-changing event that took place that morning and subsequently the following 50 years. Now, where I grew up in Pittsburgh, it was a pretty tough little town. In fact, it was really tough. And I grew up realizing, like most people in my neighborhood, you never just took somebody's word for anything. You just didn't. You didn't believe half of what you heard. The other half you really weren't quite sure of. But at any rate, I listened to them, but it made no sense to me. It was contrary to everything I'd ever heard about catching a fish. There I was. I'm out in the middle of the lake with this guy. And I've committed to it. So we're going to go on from there. Well, he told me some other things during the course of that morning, but I'm going to give you the end cliff note here so I can move on to what I really want to talk about today. But from that moment forward, we started fishing. And we were out next to this deep water slot of about 17 feet of water. And we were fishing the break line or the edge where it's breaking off into that 17 feet of water. And we fished that thing for about a mile. And by noontime, we had caught 55 of the biggest bass I'd ever seen in my life, ever contemplated seeing in my life. Now, if you would have told me when we started, when we left that dock, if someone would have said to me, listen, before lunchtime, you're going to be you won't be catching part of these fish, but you're going to be part of catching 55 bass, where 3 of them are going to be over 10 pounds. There's going to be a great majority of those fish are going to be between 6 and 7 pounds. And of the 55 bass you're going to catch, the smallest fish is going to be 4.5 pounds. I would have answered you in this fashion. Stealing a line from one of my favorite movies. Are you on drugs? I mean, there's no way. Think about it. Some stranger's telling you that you're going to catch 55 bass between 4.5 and 10 pounds. And you're going to do it all before noontime. And then compound that by going out into the be like driving right now out into the center of this lake and stopping the engine and saying, here's where we're going to do it. Well, in 1970, that would have been your response. Are you on drugs? There's no way that's going to happen. But it did. He not only told me, but then he showed me. He also allowed me to hold a rod and be part of what was going on. He was driving the boat, I just holding on. And I caught pretty near half of those fish myself. Never seen a bass that big, much less 55 bass that big. So did it get my attention? Yes, obviously. I'm not lying to you. I was in the boat, my hands were shaking like this, and so were my legs, my knees, everything on me. I was shook up. And it took a lot to get me shook up, but I was shook up that day. I tried to not let him see it, about how I was shaking. I was literally shaking. That's how excited I was. And to bring this to a conclusion, especially for those of you who already had heard that story, he gave me one of his books that he had written 5 years previous to that. In 1965, it was published, called Spoon Plugging, E.L. Buck Perry. This is a first edition. But on the front of his book, he said, I don't want you to ever forget what's written up here. He said, because it's the truth of it all. And what it says is knowledge is the key to fishing success. Now, today, all the young hotshots of today, they never took the time to even think about that. They're too busy buying their $50 and $60 and $70,000 boats, going 75 mile an hour. Who's got the fastest prop and so all of that stuff that goes with it. There's stuff going on in the fishing business today that is so contrary to a basic truth about successful fishing that it's sad. And that's the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm going to try to change a little bit, change it a little bit. If I can change it even just a little bit, I'll be happy. But this statement, knowledge is the key. When I left Mr. Perry that day, he said to me, he said, people think that they can buy success. It's some fancy wrap package. There's a new lure coming out every year, a new rod, new reel. The manufacturer's doing all they can do to sell equipment. Can't just keep everything the same. It's like golf today. Every year, TaylorMade, Callaway, they all come up with a brand new tool that's somehow a little bit different than the one that was out last year. It's called marketing. It's called business. It's called making money. I get it. And I don't blame anybody for being caught up in it. These young guys today, they don't know what I know. They don't realize that the real key to success is knowledge. Buck had it right all along. And when you stop and think about it, it's no different than golf or any other sport or activity that you like to do in your spare time. Whether it's bowling, whether it's golf, whether it's fishing, whether it's hunting, in every activity, baseball, football, basketball, even soccer, I'm told. I don't know much about soccer. Every sport there is has experts, has books, and some of these experts are actually pioneers. Let's take golf. Bobby Jones was a pioneer. Ben Hogan was a pioneer. People still reading his book. Of course they are. That was my book. That was what I grew up on. Harvey Penick. I read all of those pioneers, guys that were known as pioneers, not just guys that had talent, guys or gals, that had talent in a certain sport. There's millions of them. But actual people that pioneered their sport in some fashion. Those names are never forgotten. That's why people still talk about Bobby Jones. People still talk about Ben Hogan. including all the new hotshots that are great players. Don't take anything, I'm not taking a thing away from a great talented player. I love watching Jordan Spieth. I mean, he's my guy, man. I fell in love with the way that guy plays the game. And he takes it serious, and he's really smart. He's way smarter than his years, no doubt. And there's a bunch of other great young players, but they all had the benefit of the pioneers, the guys who pioneered the sport, who pioneered this thing called a swing plane, and so on and so forth. There are pioneers in every sport. And if you start doing some investigation, you're going to find out in fishing, there's a lot of hot shots out there. There's a lot of guys making a name for themselves. When I started into the business, there weren't but a handful of guys making a full-time living in the business. Today, there are thousands that are making a living fishing. But there's only one pioneer, Buck Perry. He revolutionized the sport in a way that I can honestly make this statement. I've made it before, it's true. No matter what young person makes a statement today concerning a fish or how to catch one or what happened in a certain situation, there's not one thing in the last 50 or 70 years that's been said of any value in fishing that Buck Perry hadn't already said. He's already said it. This guy was a pioneer. And unfortunately, in fishing, there was only one. But then again, there's only one that was needed. Buck had all the answers. Don't matter. You fishing for bass, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, white bass, stripers, walleye, northern pike, muskie, it doesn't matter. Buck talks about catching all species of fish in all types of lakes, natural lakes, rivers, man-made reservoirs, strip pits, farm ponds, name it. He talks about it. There's nothing left out. He made the discoveries that changed modern day fishing. But the most recent modern day folks never heard of him. They don't know who he is. It's so unfortunate. Not only don't they know who he was, what his contributions to our sport were, but they don't know what those contributions were. So I'm going to tell you what I've decided to do over the next couple of months. This is my plan. Now, as you know, sometimes plans will change a little bit. I might do a little crappie fishing with my grandchildren and so on and so forth. So we might have some video on something or other as we move it along. But I really have a plan that I want to share with you.